So good morning, everyone. I'm Pete Marino, President and CEO of Neighborhood Health Plan Rhode Island. Thank you, and I really appreciate you joining us this morning for our second summit of our wellness series for healthcare professionals. On behalf of Neighborhood and our great media partner, the Providence Business News, and our terrific presenters you'll hear from today, I'd like to officially welcome you to this important wellness summit enduring the pandemic with self-care strategies. While the pandemic has certainly imposed challenges on all of us, our healthcare providers, you, have borne significantly more burdens than others in order to care for us, to protect us, and to grieve with us. We're all very grateful for how all of you have continued to endure during this pandemic. So thank you for lending us your expertise, your tremendous work ethic, and the kindness that you have shown all of us and our loved ones throughout this very difficult time. We know that you are superheroes, but we also know that you are not superhuman. You are a human, and this pandemic has had an impact on you and your families. We care about you and we want to be helpful. So that's the idea behind these wellness series. I hope you find the panel of experts we have today helpful to you as we think about strategies for self-care. You have always been there for us, and we certainly want to do our part to be there for you. Neighborhood's going to continue to do its part in advocating strongly for vaccines throughout our community. We know that that is one of the cleanest paths to getting all of us to emerge from this pandemic. We know that getting those vaccination rates up is going to make sure that we're all healthy and we'll protect our families and each other. Again, Neighborhood appreciates everything you have done for us during this fight against COVID. We're grateful for you rising to the occasion to keep our communities healthy and safe. We hope today's summit really provides some great insight for you and perhaps something that you can take away to help you. So now I'm going to turn our reins over to our Neighborhood's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Mary Lou Bicey, and our incredible lineup of panelists from the Rhode Island Medical Society, Brown University's Warren Alpert School of Medicine, and Miriam Hospital. So with that, Dr. Bicey, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete, and good morning, everyone. As Pete mentioned, I'm Dr. Mary Lou Bicey, Chief Medical Officer here at Neighborhood. Before we get started with our presentation, I'd like to take a moment to speak to you, health professional to health professional. Pete's reference to your tireless work during the pandemic as almost superhuman reminded me that in our profession, we all seem to have this preconceived notion that upon earning our medical credentials, we suddenly wear a superhero cape at all times. Even before the pandemic entered our lives, we've been taught to perform our jobs in a way that makes us seem invincible. We are there for our patients as pillars of strength, voices of reason, and problem solvers of their health issues. We listen, we troubleshoot, we show empathy and concern, and we go above and beyond to provide the best care possible for our patients. Now we've added the pandemic to the mix with its elusive endpoint and pressure on healthcare workers to address increased needs. We are feeling like our capes are worn and tattered. So I'm here today, along with our incredible panelists, to implore you to give yourself permission to take off your superhero cape at a designated time each and every day for your own self-care. Please take care of yourself in the same manner you've been taking care of others, with compassion and commitment. And utilize the self-care strategies that will be shared today to guide you. Now, before I turn this presentation over to our keynote speaker and panelists, I want to thank you on behalf of Neighborhood for keeping our hospitals, community health centers, and clinics open, staffed, and safe for patients during this most difficult time. You are all amazing, and we appreciate the work you do each and every day. Now, I'd like to introduce this morning's wellness experts. First, we have Kathleen Boyd, the keynote speaker for today's summit. Kathleen has served since 2013 as director of Rhode Island Medical Society's Physician Health Program. Kathleen holds academic appointments for the Department of Medicine at Brown University and for the Center for Physician Assistant Studies at Johnson & Wales University. She also serves on the board of directors for the Federation of State Physician Health Programs and has maintained a part-time psychotherapy practice here in Providence. In her spare time, Kathleen enjoys sailing, yoga, playing the piano and guitar, and writing music when she's inspired to do so. Next, we have Dr. Sheeta Shafee, an assistant professor of emergency medicine at Brown University's Warren Alpert School of Medicine. Dr. Shafee also runs her own performance coaching practice where her expertise in emergency medicine and operations give her a unique perspective to help busy professionals build lives that allow them to thrive in both their professional and personal spheres. She also serves on the board of the Rhode Island Economic Progress Institute and the Providence Preservation Society, and is the consulting physician for the Gordon School. When not working, we can find Dr. Shafee hiking, throwing around kettlebells, or enjoying all the mischief involved with raising her 5-year-old twins and a pandemic puppy. Also joining us is Diane Mahoney, an integrative therapy nurse at Miriam Hospital. In her role, Diane restores patients and caregivers to optimal wellness through yoga, Reiki, meditation, and mindfulness. Working as a nurse for 28 years, it wasn't until the last decade that Diane realized the magic of self-care for both her professional and personal life. Committing to caring for herself first without guilt allowed her to show up for her patients, coworkers, and family at the highest version of herself. She credits this mindset transition to combating the common burnout so many nurses are experiencing with COVID and revealing her true calling and purpose of caring for caregivers so they can thrive in all aspects of their lives. Kathleen, Dr. Shafee, and Diane, we welcome you and thank you for being here today. As keynote speaker, Kathleen will set the stage for today's presentation and lead the discussion on the impact COVID has had on healthcare workers and on various self-care strategies. Dr. Shafee and Diane will contribute to the presentation through their unique perspectives. We'd like this summit to be as interactive as possible and encourage those attending today to type your comments and questions in the questions or chat box. We'll get to as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. And now, let's get going with this summit. Kathleen, the reins are yours.
Thank you, Dr. Baise and Mr. Marino for your supportive comments, and thank you to Providence Business News and Neighborhood Health Plan for sponsoring this event today. I also want to acknowledge my deep appreciation to our guest panelists, Dr. Sheeta Shafee and Diane Mahoney, for graciously taking time from their busy schedules to be an important part of today's program. Good morning, everyone. Don't you kind of miss going to presentations where you could grab a cup of coffee, choose from assorted pastries, and have a little bit of time to chat with each other before choosing your seat? I sure do, but we're adaptable if nothing else, right? When we first started working on this second part of this wellness series in late June, our working title was Emerging from the Pandemic. And as you know, things changed both nationally and globally. And this got me to thinking a lot about the notion of hope. Like, where does it come from? And more importantly, how do we hang on to it? I think that ultimately it's defined individually by each of us. And if you can take a moment to identify that which brings you hope, it offers you an opportunity to try to sustain it. I think of sayings like all hope is gone versus never give up hope, and the fact that we live in a state whose motto is hope. So last year, I came across this quote about hope by Thich Nhat Hanh, and of course, I immediately typed it up, cut it out, and taped it to the bottom of my computer monitor. I've had it there since the pandemic reared its ugly head last year. Does anyone else do things like that? Well, you know, our purpose today is to really, as stated, is to really talk about some of the strategies that might help you cope. And I readily admit that this little strategy of mine might just annoy some of you or be deemed downright corny, but for me it works. And it works for me because every morning when I turn on my computer monitor, it gives me pause. Even if just for a moment I can notice, do I have some hope in my heart today, even a glimmer of it? that might help me get through some of those tougher moments I might encounter that day at a time, day at a time. So with that in mind, with that hope theme in mind, here are some of the hopes we have for this time we're sharing together this morning. We hope you get at least one takeaway that might be helpful to you personally in finding and/or protecting time for self-care, and that you be able to identify some of the barriers that might be getting in the way of that. We also hope you find some validation for the many facets of the experience of providing care to others, both positive and negative. We hope you'll feel free to add your comments or ask questions as best you can in this webinar format. As Dr. Vaisi mentioned, you can type into the question chat box, and then we're going to try to have time to address your comments and questions at the end of our presentation. And finally, we really hope that you're able to identify your personal hopes in the face of this ongoing pandemic. So one of my tasks as a program director each year is to produce an annual report. So in January of this year, I asked a healthcare provider if they might be willing to reflect on their experience of the past year, 2020. And we know that was quite a year, wasn't it? I asked for permission to share this reflection with you today. That was written before we had access to vaccines, and also when getting adequate PPE was still problematic. I still think it's a very strong example of how self-care can actually make a difference in these challenging times. I share this not to suggest in any way that there's no strain on healthcare workers related to systemic or institutional issues. I've certainly heard many comments along those lines, like, great, one more thing to add to my to-do list, how am I gonna fit it in? They think if I just take yoga or if they offer me free meditation classes, that's gonna make me feel less stressed and burned out. Yeah, I get that. But things like staffing and morale are all part of this important interplay between institutions or organizational issues and the healthcare workers' personal experience as an engaged member of that organization. Our panelists are going to share some of their ideas about how self-care can actually help us to work collaboratively, even creatively, with each other and with organizations to sustain ourselves and to hopefully survive through this tough period together. So without further ado, and with respect for the anonymity and to honor the courage of this healthcare provider willing to share their story, please join me in listening to this narrative of one provider's experience during the first leg of the pandemic in 2020.
I am a frontline provider at a busy hospital in Rhode Island. Most days I get home from work completely overwhelmed and exhausted. I collapse on the floor, can barely summon the energy to speak, and my family looks at me in horror. My back aches from long shifts spent hunched over critically ill COVID patients. My face is raw and sore and chafed. There were many shifts where I had to wear inadequate PPE, and there was the constant awareness of putting my own health and that of my family in jeopardy. Many patients are on ventilators with a grim prognosis. For those that are lucky to be awake, there is never quite enough time for compassion or connection. There are always more patients to see. The final indignity is that we were forced to take a pay cut, which was even more demoralizing. But throughout the pandemic, even in the worst of times, I have always felt that I will be okay and that I can get through this with grace. A number of years ago, I experienced a devastating personal crisis. I was fortunate to find the guidance and support I needed to get the necessary treatment to get my life and career back on track. The enduring lesson from that experience is that I cannot rely on willpower and self-reliance alone to overcome anxiety, substance abuse, or PTSD. That was an extremely difficult and uncomfortable lesson to learn because willpower and self-reliance are the very traits which helped me excel at every level of my education and medical career. It took time, but I ultimately learned to embrace vulnerability and fallibility not as a weakness, but as a sign of my humanity. As I move forward with my life, It was a commitment to always put personal health, wellness, and family first over career and ambition. As we started the new year and the pandemic raged unabated, I made the difficult decision to cut back on my work hours. I reconnected with a therapist I used to see, which has been incredibly helpful. Also important has been making sure to get plenty of sleep. I used to take pride in being able to get by on only 4 to 6 hours of sleep, but now I aim for at least 8 hours each night. I eat a healthy diet and get regular exercise. I meditate and practice yoga daily. As I write this, I have an awareness that these may come across as indulgences in the midst of a national and global health crisis. But I assure you that these are not indulgences. These are critical things that I need to be at my best as a provider and serve the public. When I wake up in the morning to get ready for another difficult day at work, I feel well rested. My head is clear and my heart is open. I listen to inspirational music as I drive into work, and I feel incredible gratitude. Gratitude for my own health and for also the privilege to be able to help others in this time of need.
So can you hear me? Give me a thumbs up. Yes, yes, okay. Many of you may relate to this person's story. You may have lived some version of it. And I'm sure most of you, if not all of you in the audience, are familiar with the many ways that the pandemic has impacted on those working in healthcare. It's been covered extensively in journals, the general media, and certainly in social media over the past 18 months. The reflection we just heard touched on many of the aspects of areas that impact our lives during the pandemic. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on that, but I do want to just do a quick review. So this is a marathon of unknown duration. We thought we saw the light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe the light's still there, but we're still running, right? We're still running. So I want to just touch on the different impact areas, if we can advance that slide. Thank you. There's lots of research, voluminous research, and years of research on the impact of stress on our personal health. We all know that. But what we also know is that the body is better at recovering from short-term or acute stress. So those in emergency medicine know about this. You're confronted with it all the time. And I remember it from my days working on a crisis stabilization unit. You can have a particularly tough shift, or you witness a traumatic patient situation or outcome. And that particular shift could have just wiped you out, but then you usually have an ability to recover from that. But when it becomes relentless, we experience chronic stress levels that affect all systems of our body, and it's much, much harder to recover from. Those residual effects, things like intrusive memories and the continued physiological hyperarousal, those stress hormones don't have the chance to slowly return to normal levels. So to counteract this, sometimes we see an increase in use of alcohol or other substances in an attempt to find some comfort. And that can also come in the form of things like food, or some of us may be guilty of binge watching all sorts of shows that are now available on these streaming, what do you call them, streaming systems? What are they? Streaming companies? I'm trying not to use a specific name. So anyway, you know what I'm talking about. But some of this is really a form of numbing from some of those uncomfortable feelings, from the exhaustion. And we certainly have seen an increased incidence of depression, anxiety, acute stress disorder, and PTSD. So you don't have that opportunity to recover, but you still have to continue to work. And those of you working in hospitals, emergency departments, wards, other 24-hour institutions don't have that option to work from home. Now, we know that there are many in medicine that that through the pandemic have been able to offer telehealth, but you can't do that when you're on the front lines. It's very difficult. And then you layer onto that concerns about possibly contracting COVID yourself or infecting your family. The provider's reflection talked about that. So there's fears about your own risk factors, your family's risk factors, and it's always there in your mind. I know my daughter had COVID in February and March of this year. It was very distracting to me until I knew she was out of the woods and she was going to be okay. I'm happy to report she's fully recovered, but it weighs on you. And then, of course, another layer is the long hours, the pressures to keep working because of patient demands, and also because of staffing issues. So if your colleagues test positive, they have to quarantine, you may have to quarantine. So it all kind of gets mushed together, all these different impacts. Isolation can be difficult, isolation for you with people that you're not able to see. We've had grief of all kinds, right? We couldn't celebrate graduations, anniversaries, births of babies and grandbabies, and we've lost colleagues, we've lost friends, we've lost family members, and we've certainly lost patients. Over 640,000 people have died in the United States to date. So that's a lot. And how long is it going to go on? This whole idea about burnout among healthcare workers certainly predated the pandemic. Can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. Christina Maslach did the seminal contribution to this on the Maslach Burnout Inventory, which was actually published in 1996, so 25 years ago. So that's nothing new. And in the previous Wellness Summit, I talked briefly about this other kind of survey, the Professional Quality of Life Survey, that was also developed in 1996 by a psychologist by the name of Charles Figley, and then later it was really developed and refined by Beth Hudnall-Stamm. I just want to give them credit for this. This is a free scale that you can download and use. Their work was really specifically about healthcare and humanitarian workers. So it's a little different than Maslach's work because she was really looking at overall burnout in employment, not necessarily just the healthcare industry. So if you think of our profession as being in the business of caring, then the currency, if you will, is our compassion. And sometimes the cost of caring for others is compassion fatigue. And I like their model that compassion fatigue is really a combination of burnout factors and secondary trauma. And we all are so aware of what wears us down, right? So it's important, and in their particular survey that they do, they also ask about those things in our profession that bring us satisfaction. So if you're finding yourself on autopilot and you're going through the motions, it's sometimes described as being robotic. It's a real red flag, right? It's an indicator that your job, your professional identity, about caring for others is taking a toll on it. Toll on you. And so that's really why being able to identify some of the things that give you some satisfaction is so important. It's sort of a cost-benefit analysis, if you will, or pros and cons list. And while this survey is really looking at specific things around your professional caring for others, I think it's also important to think about some of the other things that might not be related to patient care that bring you some job satisfaction. Things like, gosh, I love my colleagues. I love working on this team. I look forward to seeing them every day. Or I like working 3 to 11. That's my energy time. That's my favorite shift. Or I like having 2 days off during the week and not working Monday through Friday. It gives me lots more flexibility. Or maybe you like the salary that you can command because of your specific skills. So those are things that can offset all these things. I want to ask our two panelists, Dr. Shafee and Diane Mahoney, to join in the conversation. Could you share a story of what helps you get through your days or enables you to stay in your healthcare career?
Sure. I have been doing a lot of thinking about what kind of gets me through my day. And one of the things that is a lot about like what I'm thinking about the work that I'm doing. And even before this pandemic, you know, emergency medicine and in medicine in general, we sign up to go and be with people when they're suffering. And in emergency medicine, we definitely hold a lot of people who, social infrastructure, there's no place to put these people. It's like they're people that nobody really wants to take care of, right? They're homeless, they don't have resources, and, sometimes they get picked up because someone calls 911 because they're walking around, and they bring them to the emergency room and we take care of them. And when I think that that's my role, that's the role that I signed up for, is to hold people in their suffering and in their pain. And that's what I choose to do with myself. It makes me feel pretty good about myself and my team. Like we are there to hold people through their suffering and through their pain. And I chose to do that. And then the second part of that is, for me to be able to do that, I realized that I have to take care of myself, because, some people, like, there's lots of different jobs in this world. There's a lot of jobs I could have chosen to go into and be in, but most of us in healthcare are holding people through a painful experience in their life. And that's actually a really beautiful thing to do, to be able to hold people and walk them through and coach them through when they're suffering. And so we hold a lot of stress by choice. We hold on the stress that other people are experiencing. And so the second part of that, what helps me get through that, is recognizing that that's a valuable contribution to society, and then recognizing that I get to take care of myself extra, because you know what? This is like an incredible service that we provide to the world. So that's kind of a lot of where a lot of my compassion and satisfaction comes from.
Thank you, Dr. Shafie. Diane?
Hi, good morning. To echo a lot of what Dr. Shafie said, yes, our job is it's challenging, and we are sharing, sometimes within seconds of meeting patients, the most intimate moments of their life, either birth, death, pain, suffering, collaborating with their family. And it's heavy, it's deep, and it is beautiful. But again, what we need to do, and what I found that helps to be okay during that and to see the beauty in that, is absolutely to choose that mindset for myself for the day, see that part of it instead of the drain of it, and what I need to do to make sure that that outlook stays at that level most of the time. And again, it doesn't always, and that's another thing about taking our superhuman capes off sometimes. Sometimes we don't see it as beautiful as, as it is today. Tomorrow we might. But a lot of the compassion satisfaction that I've gotten, that I have achieved through this, and what I've chosen to focus on, is really to pour into my fellow caregivers and nurses. I've been working side by side with so many of these people for years, and we've had, highs, lows, family issues, personally separate from our careers, and we've just all been through them together. We've held each other through difficult patients, but this has been a really challenging time. And really, I've seen, and I've said this several times, but I've seen the light just dimming in their eyes. And so my satisfaction has come from trying to help turn those lights back on and support our caregivers, in the best way I can. And through the integrative therapy program at the hospital, giving back, coming to each unit, participating in our wellness initiatives, and just trying to provide some help day to day, really showing my journey. I've always been, or at least, like I said, for the past decade, committed to my own self-care. And so the way I help is to try to show that, either at the hospital or through my platform, through Whole Healthy Nurse, and just to show the reality of it, show that some days I'm not great at it and some days I am, and just every day showing up. But to be able to pour into our caregivers and see that the response to that, just the 10 minutes to listen to them, to give a massage, and to take them away from that front line for a few minutes, and just, the response of, now I can go back to my day. That restored me. This is a wonderful thing. Thank you so much. that felt great. It's just that has lifted me up and filled me up. But again, it can't be possible to do that unless we've taken care of ourselves. So that's my number one priority in order to be able to show up and help out our fellow caregivers.
Thank you, Diane. That was part of my next question to both of you was, what are some strategies that you found helpful when you're feeling burned out by the work? And I think you talked a bit about that, Diane. Dr. Shafi, do you have anything to add about that, the strategies you found most helpful?
Sure. When we talk about stress is a physiologic reaction too, in addition to being a thing that we feel. Stress, when stress comes from when we felt like we're in danger, or when we feel like something is contentious, our bodies are adapted to have a stress response. And that stress response is the hormonal cascade that starts in our body. And, if we're in the wild, like if we're, back in the Stone Ages or whatever, like that stress would come with like a lion is chasing us, right? So we'd have all these hormones and we have this response, and lions don't chase us anymore, but we have stress and our body has that same stress reaction. One of the things that leads to burnout is like multiples of these stress reactions that kind of go unanswered. So in the wild, we would have like ran away from that lion and that would cause a release of all those hormones. Because when you're having a stress reaction, it's expecting your body to kind of fight or flight, and we don't answer it that way, right? We're having a stressful moment at work, like the CAT scanner's not working. There's 50 patients waiting for a CAT scan, and you're not running away, you're not fighting any lion, you're just sort of sitting in that stress. And so when those stress cycles build up, that is one of the things that kind of adds to our burnout. And so for me, the best way, I think Dr. Boise initially was alluded that I love throwing kettlebells and I love hiking. Like those are the things, one of the ways to finish out that stress response cycle is by taking care of yourself through physical activity. So I am a big proponent of physical activity. Now, it doesn't need to be kettlebells, it doesn't need to be hiking, but doing something every day. And I actually want to share a little tool that I made for myself during the pandemic, because early in the pandemic was very scary to be an emergency room doctor, right? Like we had no idea the transmissibility of this thing. I have 2 young kids at home. I have a husband who has really bad asthma, or not really bad, but decent asthma. I was really concerned about bringing things home. And so, when I got into that worry space, I literally made this little cube for myself that has 6 sides on it. And it had little activities that I know uplift me. And I committed to doing them for 15 minutes a day. I would roll the cube and I'd be like, whatever has on this, as much as I don't feel like doing it, I would actually do it. And so like the things were like dancing with my pods in, and there's walking with the dog, meditation, writing, getting on my Peloton, self-spa, like putting on a face mask. I don't even do those things that often. But I was like, oh, it'll feel good to do it. And so I really committed, as much as I didn't want to do it, to doing it. And so, my big thing is really a little bit of movement every day really changes things. Even if you're not gonna wanna do it. That 15 minutes though of taking a walk changes things greatly. So that's kind of my big self-care strategy.
Thank you. Thank you both. I'm going to ask you both one more probably tough question. If you had to ask an employee to do one thing to help promote wellness among staff, what would it be?
I would say listen. Number one, listen. Listen to what the employees are really asking for. Number 2, be aware, because they're not always going to ask for it. And so have that, the just education or collaboration with different resources that you offer. So because everyone's going to process this in a different way. So have the resources available, and really that encouragement to utilize them, because it's not enough to just have them, but to have the awareness across the organization and to really have leadership's buy-in to facilitate the utilization of the resources. So just be present, be aware, be visible on your units at every level, and just listen and watch. Pay attention to your employees and just get to know who they are. So when they're not themselves, that's, I think once you really know your employees, you do know when they're not themselves, because that is sometimes what you're listening for. And I think that's just crucial to taking the next step to create the optimal level of wellness, because I think we're all striving for, and many organizations are striving for our nurses to be bachelor's levels and certified and all that. But honestly, I think it's more important to find out how many hours of sleep your staff members are getting than it is how many initials are after their name. I think that's the true nature of a great organization, is how many healthy members are part of it.
Thank you, Dr.
And
You want to add
to
something?
echo some of that is to make sure that we prioritize breaks and taking time like that. We're often really focused on getting just moving, but we're not taking a look from the higher level of okay, these people need breaks. And then the other thing is to think about your values. We often in healthcare, we prioritize being positive, and that can actually be kind of tricky. I don't think the overall arching theme of everybody staying positive may not be a realistic goal. And I think staying positive in the face of staffing issues and all of the issues that we're seeing kind of highlighted in the pandemic is maybe not a realistic goal. And maybe staying effective is a little bit more of a goal that I would aim for, because sometimes staying positive, you feel bad about yourself for not being excited to go into a shift that's short-staffed with long wait times for patients, without with no ICU beds available. But maybe you shouldn't stay positive in a time like that. Maybe it's okay to feel frustrated in a time like that, but still stay effective. And staying effective really changes how we talk to ourselves. It's okay, I'm trying to stay effective, so I'm just going to walk through. I'm not going to put on my blinders that there's problems, that there's no problems, and I have to stay positive. I'm going to accept there are problems, but I'm going to stay as effective as I can through this. And I think that kind of mindset really changes things for employees when you look at it through that lens.
Thank you both. Those are really good suggestions. We're going to move forward to get to some of those self-care strategies. Next slide, please. So, this is sort of learning to pace yourself and have some strategies to help us on this marathon that we're on. And in thinking about how to categorize the different types of self-care strategies, I kind of thought about them as being the 4 M's. If you could advance the next. Thank you. So I'm talking about mindfulness, movement, maintaining connections, maintaining your own health. And this is about caring for yourself as you would care for others. Now, we are so lucky on our panel here. We have 2 healthcare professionals who've been able to successfully incorporate the 4 M's into their busy lives. So I'm going to invite them to speak about how this has been working for them, the strategies, what they've found most effective, especially in the context of the pandemic. Now, you've both already touched on several of these, but I'm going to turn things over to you to talk a little more in a little more detail about each of these areas.
Thank you. So, right, I think that having had a pretty significant or consistent self-care practice was helpful, not key, but definitely helpful to sustain and keep that going through the pandemic. But just as far as mindfulness goes, it was just starting with just a few deep breaths. I mean, it doesn't have to be a super formal practice. It was getting outside, and some of these kind of overlap each other. So, taking off that PPE, getting outside for 5 minutes, just taking a few deep breaths, taking a walk, trying to find as many opportunities to be mindful and move as I could. Certainly starting out the day or really carving out that time for myself was also super important, because what I found was, and as hard as it was, we all want to hit snooze, we're all tired, but choosing a time of day that was protected and sacred to be able to do some of these things and set myself up for the day to start off that day were key. So the way I found it is just saying to myself before I hit that snooze button, and not that I don't hit it sometimes, but was nobody needs me at 5 a.m., right? So as caregivers, everyone needs us, right? From the minute we wake up, usually it's our children, it's the dog, it's work, it's coworkers, it's patients, it's everybody. But nobody needed me at 5 a.m. So that was my time to pour into myself, to create that mindset, to do a little bit of movement. And the movement I chose, it wasn't hours of exercise. It was just something that felt good, something that got my body moving. And I had already been doing these TMAC workouts, which are 20 minutes of movement, all different levels, and they were just doable. And I could hit play, get downstairs, just pour into myself for those 20 minutes, which flew by. Always ended with like a little mind right meditation, which was a moment of gratitude, shining a light on someone else, visualizing how I wanted my day to go, and then just breathing for a few minutes, which helped me to enter into my day with a clear head and, an open heart. I think that's so important. But just finding anything to be mindful and again, walking back and forth from the shuttle instead, or from the parking area instead of taking the shuttle. Just any way you can just move your body. It doesn't have to be formal. And then just connections is finding ways. I mean, we're more able to see people now, but when we couldn't, it was being creative, really pouring into that time with my family, because prior to COVID, we were all over the place. Who's in college, who's with friends, who's out, but just playing a board game or cooking with my kids or my daughter, or even if the pasta we made was an epic fail. It's just doing something together, and really just maintaining your own health is essential. So don't forget those appointments. We tend to put those off. That's very common in healthcare, and it was really common with COVID because it was difficult to get to regular appointments. But not ignoring those, because those can really, if you ignore them, they will kind of take your attention at a different moment. I mean, I've personally struggled with some kidney stone issues, and never missing those appointments to have a follow-up, and then just keeps you on track for what you need to do to maybe keep out of that emergency room. Not that I don't love to see you, Dr. Shafi, but I don't want to be in the ER. So what do I need to do? And that's important, to keep that constant relationship with your own provider, to keep yourself healthy and, at your best, just every day, just offering yourself some grace to try to get some of these things in, and being forgiving if one day doesn't look as good as the other.
Great, thank you, Diane. Dr. Shafi?
So similarly to Diane, I am actually a block timer. So I have these little sheets that I made for myself, that they're not store-bought or anything. And on the bottom of it, I have this little reminder that every day I have to schedule at least 15 minutes in 3 categories. One is physical exercise, the other is something social, which means connecting with another person, and something spiritual. For me, that it's kind of being mindful. So it's either journaling, listening to a podcast that inspires, sometimes prayer, and you can double up along that side too, for me. So sometimes I don't have 45 minutes, so sometimes I choose one activity that fits all the bills. So that can often be taking a little walk with my husband. If I take a 15-minute walk around the woods near my house, then that counts as kind of my spiritual stuff, by being in nature, that social connection with my husband, and I have the physical exercise. And the reason that those 3 categories exist, which kind of mirror one of the 3 that are the 3 on the right of your panel there, is that those are the things that I know I need to restore myself. And there's a lot of data behind that work too, of having something spiritual, which is the mindfulness, something in the movement world, and then something with connections. There's data a lot about how that is the restorative work, and I know that I need to restore myself, so I make that a priority, and I schedule that into my time. And then the other thing that creates is boundaries. And I think boundaries can sometimes be seen in the healthcare world as I need you to not call me to work overtime, or I need you to not call me to work an extra shift. And what I encourage people to think about, and I think about this in myself, is boundaries for me are what do I need to be able to do my job effectively? I need the time to be able to move, to be able to kind of sit into my mind and see what's going on in there, and to maintain connections with my family and my husband and some friends. And so when you become conscious of scheduling those things into your day, you realize, oh, these are really important for me to be able to do my job. And so my boundary is more about protecting my own time and myself so that I can show up how you need me to show up. So it's not, because I think in healthcare, we work in teams, right? We love our teams. Like, we don't want to disappoint our bosses. We don't want to disappoint our coworkers. So sometimes when we say, oh, I can't pick up that extra shift, that rhetoric that we have in our head is like, oh, I'm setting boundaries and I don't want, so-and-so to call me because, and then we like beat ourselves up for disappointing our teams. But if we can shift our thinking, like, I'm creating these boundaries for myself so I can show up for my team at my very best, it really changes that. Like, I can't pick up that shift because I haven't had any time to exercise this week or sit down with myself and see what's going on in my brain, or to be with my kids and my husband. And I need that time, and I need to carve out that time so I can show up for the best. It really changes how we talk to ourselves and how we show up with our teams too. So I think, scheduling that every day is just part of the thing. And the other thing that I don't know if you guys picked up on, that Diane and I both mentioned, is I do 15 minutes, Diane does 20 at physical movement. Like, I'm not talking like this idea of like, I have to go to the gym for an hour for it to be worth it. Like, throw that out. Like, habits don't get established like that. Like, maybe eventually you'll work up to an hour of gym time a day, but 15 minutes is plenty. 15 minutes of like a slow, gentle walk outside is enough. Sometimes we put our goals so high that, we never even try to reach for them. And so I think these smaller goals are much more attainable and kind of the way to move forward.
I have to say, you're both pretty inspirational. That's great. I'll share one thing that made a difference in my life. In 2016, I won a Fitbit at one of our national conferences and one of the raffles. I'm not really an exercise person, but the thing that it did is when I would see how it really made you aware of how sedentary your day had been. Like, if you had, 500 steps and they're telling you to get 10,000. I don't make myself do 10,000, but I try to do something every day now. And for me, it's walking. But, that was my next question, actually, to both of you. If since we all know all these areas are important, what advice would you have for other healthcare workers about how to get started or how to increase these kinds of activities? I mean, I think you're both models of this, but do you want to give them any words of wisdom about getting started or finding the time to do these things?
I think just start, just picking one thing, and if it is walking instead of taking the shuttle, if it is connecting, just maybe making a plan with a friend. So a big thing that is helpful is having some kind of accountability person. So a peer that is kind of walking that same walk with you, that understands how difficult it is and how challenging it can be to put ourselves first. So a fellow nurse or physician or somebody that just gets it and is probably struggling themselves, just find maybe that person to touch base with. And so you can, sit down and say like, well, what is it that you're trying to do? Or let's both come up with an idea of how we can add either movement or mindfulness or something. And then just kind of touch base, send a text, say, how are you doing with that? Did you get together with your sister? I think that little bit of accountability from a person that is in that area is going to help you and it'll help them. And so then, and one good habit leads to another. We see those commercials all the time. Somebody chooses, one breakfast versus another, and then shows themselves having a day that just kind of goes in a different direction based on that choice. Just one choice to just do one thing and not be overwhelmed by all you maybe haven't been doing or all you could be doing, so get could and should and haven't out of your vocabulary and just choose one thing, just make one choice.
So, and similarly, like, don't start too big. 15 minutes is plenty of time. And then the other thing that I like to offer people is the way that our brains work. They have a little triad of motivation, and the three things that the brain is designed to do is to seek pleasure, avoid pain, and keep things the same. And so that part about keeping things the same as healthcare workers, our brains are very automatically want to go help other people. We are always like, let's take care of everybody else. And so when it comes time, like if you schedule yourself for a 15-minute walk, 100%, when that time comes up, your brain's gonna be like, well, I could do this, I could do that. I don't really feel like it. Doesn't matter. You don't have to listen to your brain. We're trying to rewire your brain to do something new. And so when your brain offers you that thought of like, you could, do this form for, I have twins. There's like endless work to be able to be done for my children. Oh, I could do this for the kid's birthday party, or I could do this for this thing. It's like, oh, yep, I could, but I'm going to still honor myself that 15 minutes I've given myself to walk. 15 minutes, nothing more. And realize when you're going to start doing that, as you're taking on this new habit of taking care of yourself for 15 minutes, your brain's going to give you every excuse of why you shouldn't do that. And it's totally fine. You can still honor yourself. And as you do that, you'll build you'll build new neural circuits that allow you to kind of take care of yourself first for 15 minutes. And don't judge yourself for having all those thoughts. It's going to happen. That's just like part of the deal. Your brain's job is to keep you the same. It's going to want you to go down those old pathways. And you're going to be like, oh no, we're going to take a different way. It's just like if you're driving to a new job, like when you get into your car, you're going to drive back, you're going to drive to your old job, and you're like, oh no, turn around, car around, we got to drive this other way. It's not a big deal. You don't need to judge yourself for doing it. You just need to go to the right destination, which is taking that 15-minute walk that you've scheduled for yourself.
Great suggestions. That's wonderful. I wanted to just come back to maintaining your own health for a minute. I work with a program that sees healthcare professionals at a tough point in their lives and careers. And we're constantly confronted with this question of why it's so hard for healthcare professionals, why they're so reluctant to seek help. Next slide, please. So, I'm sure you're familiar with many of these things that, and they've all been touched on already in the talk today. But, we should be able to handle distress, and asking for help equals weakness. We should be able to diagnose what's wrong with us and then heal ourselves. But a bigger one is there's still a fear about the stigma attached to seeking behavioral health services. Rhode Island's a small state. There's a fear of running into someone we know. Now, you may go and sit in the waiting room of your primary care doctor's office and not put much thought into it. But if you're waiting in a behavioral health practice, a psychiatrist's office, and you run into someone, somehow we end up feeling differently about that, right? Well, mental health should be as important as physical health, right? The whole body, mind and body. There unfortunately still remains a distinction made between the two. We would encourage our patients, our families, our friends, our colleagues to seek help and resources, so why not us? I felt I would be remiss not to say a word or two about Dr. Lorna Breen. I'm sure many of you are familiar with her story, and I put this quote up from the New York Times from last year. She was an emergency medicine physician who was working in New York City. She contracted COVID and became quite despondent and discouraged, and unfortunately killed herself in April of last year. Her sister, Jennifer Feist, and her husband, Corey, established a foundation in her name called the Dr. Lorna Breen Heroes Foundation. I want to read to you a quote from her sister. "We envision a world where seeking mental health services is universally viewed as a sign of strength for healthcare professionals. They've put together landmark legislation called the Dr. Lorna Breen Healthcare Provider Protection Act, which is specifically focused on mental health care for all healthcare workers. It passed the Senate on August 6th and will be reviewed in the House mid-September. We're very hopeful about this. Their mission really is to work on reducing stigma, to seeking mental health services for healthcare providers, to freeing up funding to work on that, and also to provide more resources, mental health resources for healthcare workers. Dr. Shafie and Diane, do you have any thoughts about ways to reduce stigma to seeking help for yourself or when you work in the medical field? I know, Diane, you briefly touched on some of the work you're doing with ICU staff. in this regard?
Yes, and I think that number one, it is to normalize it. It is to recognize that even without this pandemic, we all there is all that need to touch base and make this just as much a priority of our health as anything, as physical, as getting our mammograms, as everything that we do to protect our overall health. But the pandemic has really highlighted this. And because we haven't maybe done such a great job at normalizing it, right now, here we are finding ourselves in crisis. And again, not everyone is going to recognize they're in that crisis or ask for help. So what we've been working on through the ICU is to really just set up an offering of check-ins. That's what we're calling them, is just a check-in with a provider to just touch base 30 minutes at no expense to the employee, and just to go over and just have a connection. And some will just be kind of just a review of maybe getting back to some self-care practices that they had maybe lost touch with. Others might be deeper, and then continue on with that particular provider, or maybe find a more suitable one that works, that has a connection, because it is about a good connection as you're digging into some of these issues as we've been struggling with. And it's just it's offered to everyone, because there is it's impossible to see who would need it, who doesn't. Everybody needs this right now. And the ICU staff have been some of the hardest hit staff members through this pandemic. They've seen the most amount of death and suffering, both at the patient level, at the coworker level. They've felt that angst of each other's pain and just trying to help each other through it. The physicians, there's no one that is immune to it. They've heard that just guttural, pain from family members on the phone through FaceTime, and not been able to allow what we're so natural at and good at, is bringing that family in and bringing the family unit together. The nurses at the ICU level, they were the family. They were the family, the caregiver. So, there is no one that is unaffected. So to just get rid of that, like, who needs it more? Everyone needs this. And so we're setting those up over the next, month or so. We have a few different providers that we're scheduling. I'm working closely with the manager of the ICU to set this up in a way that is convenient for all the nurses. And I think we're doing it at the nurse and the CNA level, because they were just as affected. And start with that and just move forward in the organization based on what I hope will be a really positive outcome to the mental health of those nurses, and all, if we can continue. So we're also been, EAP is a service that's provided, that's free. I have been, sharing that information through our wellness newsletter. When I see nurses and staff members, when we do massage, just kind of doing a little check-in of my own, because I know them personally, to see who's where. And some that massage was great, they get back to work and they're good. Others, like, they might cry during that massage, and just let it go. And so having that connection and being able to provide that resource, and also making that call myself, making that EAP call to get my own services, and just walking that talk, because to be that person that's there to support the other staff members and patients through this integrative role, well, I need to take care of myself. Not just getting up early and working out, but how am I addressing my own mental health and being that example? So I just think that, utilizing these resources, making them accessible to all, and really encouraging everybody to participate is key to kind of getting over that stigma of, of that it is okay to be not okay. That's the thing. And I think before it was like, afraid to be seen as a sign of weakness. Got to keep that superhero cape on all the time, and really, even the superheroes, every show you watch, they take them off. They go in the phone booth. They always take it off. Why do we feel like we can't take it off? So take it off, put it aside, get it dry cleaned while you take care of your mental health. Very important.
Thanks, Diane. I was just going to add, one thing, Dr. Shafi. I have a psychotherapy practice that I've had for many years, and I have some clients that I've seen for many years. And, you know, occasionally one of them will say, "Oh, Kathy, am I going to be in therapy forever?" And I, you know, like it's a bad thing or something. And I said, well, you know, you could think about it that way, or you could think about it as self-care, that this is just one other thing you do for yourself. You go talk to someone who's hopefully objective and not part of your work life or your family life, so that you can talk about the things that are troubling you in a safe environment. It's like taking vitamins and exercising and doing all those other things you do for self-care. It's just another part of it. So I just thought I'd add that.
Yeah, I mean, to echo that, I'm a performance coach, right? Like on top, like I love looking at what our brains are doing and what they're telling us and the narrative behind that, right? And so it's so funny to me that like none of us would, like, let's say I'm trying to drive to the Warwick Mall, which I can never find the Warwick Mall because I never remember the exit. I always put on my GPS, right? Like I turn it on and it tells me where to go. And it shows me the way to the easiest path to get there. Now, I could also just try to like remember where the Warwick Mall is, but I'll always take the wrong exit because like that exit splits, and I always take the wrong one, and then I have to circle around for 15 more minutes. And so what I tell people is like, that is like we don't understand how our brains work often, and we don't know what our brains are telling us. There's a lot of story and narrative like in our lives, and our brains are designed to function a certain way. And what therapy is and what coaching is just like that GPS of like, this is what your brain is doing. Like you can be told you can like look at it and examine which way you're doing and then figure out the way that you want to go. Or you can just go blind and try to like get lost getting to the Warwick Mall and take the wrong exit and circle around it and like suffer through figuring it out. And so we make therapy or coaching these big deals of like, oh, there's something wrong with me. No. You're just trying to like highlight what's going on with you, right? And once you become aware of what's going on with you, you get to make you have a lot more agency, you have a lot more power. And so of course, like I'm a performance coach. Of course I have my own coach. Of course I'm like, you know, like I have a peer coach that I coach with at least once a week. Like that, I love that. It's like what highlights, oh, this is what's going on for me right now. Great. Like, and having that objective person to sit and walk you through it, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong. I actually think that, you know, therapy or coaching should be something that even if you feel great, if you want to perform at a higher level in your life, that's like part of that is like, you just got to get on that train, because every time that you get to a new level in your life or to a new challenge in your life, like having that perspective is super helpful. So yes, the pandemic highlighted our need for this because it took away so much of our buffering, right? Like we had so many things taken, like before, you know, after work, you go get a couple of drinks with some friends from your colleagues and you guys connect in that way and you let go of the stress, or you go get a manicure. All that was stripped away for about 6 weeks. We could not do any of those things. And so you're faced with all these feelings and emotions, and you're like, whoa, where are these coming from? Well, they're coming from your brain. And if you understand how your brain works, you have the manual to figure out how you want to move forward with that. And so that is all therapy is, that is all coaching is. It's understanding what's going on in your brain, and it just gives you a ton of power and agency. So, you know, this idea, I know that we have a lot of stigma about it, but what I offer people is to realize that this is just understanding the manual of your brain. That's all it is. And like, sign me up, let me know, and let's like keep moving forward with it.
Great, thank you. I think I'm going to skip ahead since we have so much to say. We're running out of time a bit. I just wanted to talk for a minute about a few years ago. I was at an annual conference for physician health programs, and I heard this terrific speaker, Sari Gilman, who presented this idea about self-care and boundaries being connected. And I hadn't really thought about it that way, and it really resonated with me fully, that the biggest challenge to my self-care is my problem with saying no when sometimes I really need to. Next slide, please. So I love this idea that she presented about how we have a yes or no compass inside of us to help us establish our boundaries and keep our boundaries. Boundaries are there for you to take care of you. Boundary setting is normal, but it requires some skill, because other people, they're not invested in maintaining your boundaries. You know, they often have something that they need fulfilled, like an extra shift or whatever. And so they don't define how strong your boundaries need to be. So, I mean, one question, of course, is how clear are those boundaries at work? Is it defined about what's the expectation about the number of hours that you work? Is there sort of an unspoken expectation that you take extra shifts or work a double? And what about at home? What are the expectations there? So setting personal boundaries can allow you to meet both your emotional and physical needs, because it can allow you time to sleep, for example. So I think of it too of it's like putting a time boundary around yourself. So it's a strategy to protect other people's access to you so that you have access to yourself. So several years ago, I'll just share this. My husband got weird. How do I get it in the screen there? This is a no button. I guess he figured out I had a problem with saying no. And I can press it and it doesn't work because I don't know how many years ago the batteries died and I never replaced them. So that should tell you something. However, I would say that visual cues are good, even though it's not working. And who knew that there is a website devoted to the no button? It's called www.thenobutton.com. I have no financial interest in this company. So I'm just stating that, so there's no conflict of interest, but it's an interesting strategy. So Diane and Dr. Shafi, I've shared my biggest challenge to maintaining my self-care. Would you be willing to do the same?
Yes, I am a big, like I teach this all the time to our residents. I teach it all the time to our my colleagues. So the concept that I share about this is that like your life is a lemon. You get to give however much of that lemon to anybody that you want, but they're going to squeeze that whole thing. So a lot of my colleagues get mad at our boss and they say, oh, there's holes to be shifted. They expect me to fill it. No, no, no. His job is to ask us all, can you fill these holes? And then your job is to say yes or no. Like, and that yes or no is how much of your lemon you're going to give. If you give 100% of your lemon to our boss, he's going to squeeze the whole thing. His job is to squeeze lemons. So like empty them out, wring them out dry. That's his job. And our job is to decide how much of our lemon to give to him. So like if I need 50% of my lemon at home because I have 2 young kids and a husband and all the stuff that I have to take out of our home, I give him 50% of my lemon. But if when I was younger, like, and I didn't have kids, like I gave like 80, 90% of my lemon to my job because like I had the time, I didn't have anything else going on. I wanted to do that. So you get to decide how much of yourself you give, and it's not, because then we make it about like a very personal thing, like, oh, you know, my boss is asking too much of me. No, your boss's job is to ask you, and your job is to say, oh, I can or cannot do this based on how that's going to affect the rest of your life, how you can show up in the rest of your life. So boundaries are a way of loving yourself. It's not about like saying no or trying to control another person. It's also about being like, oh, for me to be able to function and be a happy human being, I need to have dinner 3 nights a week at home with my children. So if that means skipping journal club, skipping whatever other recreational activity, other like work-related activity, that's what I need. It's like not personal towards me. It's not personal towards my boss. My boss is not a horrible person for asking me. My job is to protect myself and what I need to do my job. His job is to ask me for whatever he needs from me. And it's not a personal thing.
Thank you. Diane, do you have anything to add?
Well, one thing is you got to keep a little bit of your lemon, because what else you're going to put in your Tito's, right? So, but all kidding aside, it is about just setting your boundaries. My biggest obstacle in setting my own boundaries is just like distraction. It's not being super clear on what, or it was not like what I want my day to look like and how I want my, life to go. So if you're not clear about that, then who else is going to be, and nobody's going to protect that time for yourself. So if you want to get up in the morning and get certain things done, you set that up. You make calendar or appointments with yourself, and it's okay. And just giving yourself that grace of it's okay to say no. It is okay to say no. We are trying to create, we're trying to get rid of that culture of you know, the one with the most overtime in a pay period wins a prize. You know, that is not, it's not serving us. Might be serving, and it's not really serving the hospital either, because, you know, that those staff members are just the ones who just keep showing up because they feel like they have to. Ultimately, that is not serving the hospital because they're burning out quicker. So just giving that okay to say no, even if you might have said yes last week, because sometimes you can pick up an extra shift and it's great and people appreciate it. And I've picked up extra time where I've been very, very fulfilled by it because I could. But, you know, knowing when it's okay to say no, and really allowing that culture amongst each other, and helping each other, helping our colleagues protect our boundaries too. You know, because how many times have you heard, and I don't know how this is in the physician world, but we've heard it all the time, you know, maybe the newer nurse doesn't pick up that shift and it's like, oh, you know, they don't work like they used to, or, you know, they don't, you know, work as much, or, but maybe they got it right. Maybe that boundary protection is kind of like the wave of the new generation of healthcare, and it will ultimately serve us all so much better, our patients, ourselves, our coworkers, our colleagues. So really being clear and supporting each other to maintain that work-life balance. You know, if you see your coworker, you know, frustrated because they said yes about picking up a shift, you know, maybe talk to them and, you know, remind them that they don't have to. You don't have to say yes to every single, you know, request to cover a shift. And if we protect that sacredness, then maybe we won't have as many shifts that are open to be filled. So.
Thank you both. I just wanted to quickly show you this, you know, little survey you can do with yourself. That's also from Sari Gilman, who's a therapist herself. It's about your self-care. So it just has these 4 questions that has you kind of rate yourself in terms of your self-care at home, your self-care at work. Does your job allow you some time to do self-care? And are you a model of self-care for others? I think the last one is particularly important as parents, what we're modeling for our kids. And somehow I begat a workaholic daughter. So she's learning about self-care now. And also, if you're a supervisor, you know, you can kind of model that yourself. I think Dr. Shafi's been talking about that a little bit in her work as working with residents and students. So this is just something to think about. But once we've identified those needs, I know we're getting short on time and we do want to get to your questions. So let me just say, we want to sort of talk about, once you identify where these areas are, how do you advocate either at work or home or with your friends or family? Dr. Shafi and Diane, do you have an example of when you kind of tried to advocate for yourself and how it went?
I mean, the only thing I can, you know, the thing I think of that pops up most in my head is advocating for myself. And I shared this before, is against myself. You know, I was my biggest obstacle of my own self-care. And it was watching so many other people, you know, take the time for themselves, being resentful, feeling, you know, just like that wasn't an option for me, or, you know, it'd be nice if I had the time. And, you know, early in my husband and mine's relationship, we've been together almost 25 years, is that he was great at this. You know, he would have golf dates and time for his friends, and yet plenty of time for me and time for his job. And I was like, you know, it'd be nice if I could have that time. And he was always like, so go take it, you know, because, you know, we talk about time. I wish I had that time. Well, we're never going to have that time. So that's true at work as well. You have to take the time. So, you know, I guess advocating for ourselves in that we take our lunch break. We make sure we don't play that martyr. Like, and I know sometimes it's easier than others based on which department you work in, but it's really important to take the time for yourself. And, you know, we try to work with leadership to make sure that that is available, but you got to take it too, because, you know, we're always, and nurses are notorious for this, like, what else could I be doing? What else could I be doing? So you have to advocate for yourself to take that 15, 20 minutes or however long, just to disconnect, take your time, take your break, get outside, and pour back into yourself, because your coworker's not going to do it for you. And as much of the resources as your hospital, even the very best hospital, and we have worked for a great institution, they're not going to do it for you. They can have that opportunity, but you have to do it. You have to be the one who chooses to take that time for yourself. So, it's advocating for yourself and against yourself. Sometimes you're your biggest obstacle. So really, is identifying where you could be a little bit more kind of selfish. It's not selfish, but take that time for you, whether it be at home, whether it be at work, you're going to come back restored and better. And your patients are going to thank you, and your coworkers are going to thank you. And it's just, you have to take that time, because there is no extra time. You have to make it.
Thanks. Diane, I tell my clients that it's not selfish, it's self-respecting.
Totally. And I think that the other thing is ask for what you need. Like I was a very junior doctor when I was offered a leadership position in my old job, and it was very time intensive job. It was basically going to be Monday morning, 5 a.m. till Friday at like midnight. I was going to be getting phone calls and whatever 24/7. And so, very crazily, I was like, if I'm going to do that, I'm not going to work clinically on weekends. And that's what I need to be able to, I need time to restore myself. And, like my boss was like, what? No one's ever asked for that. I was like, that's okay. That's what I need. Like, it's okay to ask for what you need. It's also okay for them to say no, and you be like, okay, well then I can't do this job. It's not a big deal. I ended up ultimately getting what I needed, and I ended up taking that leadership position. And then when when I moved to Rhode Island, I decided I didn't want to be a leadership because I had young kids and whatever. But you get to ask for whatever it is that you need. It's totally fine. You could say like, to do this job, I need to be able to wear like pink goggles every day, and then your boss gets to say yes or no, and it's totally fine. And it's not a big deal. But if you don't ask for what you need and then you resent your boss for not giving you what you need, like that's a really hard situation to be in. So always, always, always what I tell people, if you're just ask for what you need, and they get to decide if they're going to give it to you, and you get to decide whether you want to take that job or not.
Thank you both. I just wanted to, along those lines, the next slide just gives you a quick little technique called the desk technique. So the most important thing, D, is describing the situation to yourself, really figuring out what it is that's bothering you, then explaining it. E, explaining it to the person in question using I statements, and we can use this with our family too. Is things like, geez, I've noticed that I cook dinner 6 out of 7 nights a week, stating the change you would like to see. Could we switch off every other day? We're at work, gosh, I've noticed that I don't respond well when I don't get my lunch break. My blood sugar plummets, I become irritable, and my mind gets foggy. I need to have my lunch break every day. It's very important. K is know that you might not get what you wanted. Of course, that's the best outcome, but even an okay can lead to a compromise. So I think the importance of this little technique is just you've found your voice. You've made your request, and you've gotten that conversation started. We are running out of time. Just quickly, we're just going to touch on resiliency, and I'm going to turn that over to our two panelists who are experts about this. They're very well versed in resiliency for themselves, but also do coaching with other people. So I think I have 8:50, is that correct? And we may have a few questions. We do want to be able to get to that, but would you like to say a few words about sort of your own experiences with becoming resilient and then helping others be that way?
I'll just start real quickly to say that resiliency is, you are all, first of all of you in healthcare are already resilient. Just remember that. you are here, you are doing this work, you are serving during this pandemic. That is resiliency. We are writing our narrative right now, and we're going to look back on it in 5 years when we're through this whole thing, or maybe 10 years when it's all over and done with. And you can tell yourself whatever you want about how you showed up, but the fact that you're showing up every day, that is resiliency. It's easy to judge yourself. Let go of that judgment. Be curious about how you're showing up, and you know, we are resilient. And so that is the thing that I want to remind you all of in this moment, is that you are resilient. You're showing up, you're doing the work. Even if you're suffering through it, you're still resilient, and you can handle that suffering however you choose to.
Thank you. Diane, I see we have some questions. Do you have a brief comment you could add about resiliency, and then we'll get to the question?
You know, to echo on that, it is, yes, I've never been around more resilient people, but it's that reminder that we are resilient, and it's keeping, you know, envisioning it's like the perfect storm, right? We are in charge of our boat. And that is how I envision my resiliency, is that you're not changing the world around you. We can't like snap our fingers and everything's perfect and everything goes away. You know, what we're doing every day is developing a better sense of resiliency and more of the kind of like grace that goes along with resiliency. And it's that forgiveness. It's that, you know, letting go of what you did or didn't do yesterday or this morning. And it's knowing that in your boat, in that storm, you have the ability to kind of keep it steady. So, and there's always tomorrow, and there's always another chance to, you know, do something different or better, but that it's just give yourself that forgiveness. It's really crucial. That's so much a part of resilience, is the grace and the letting go of what you can't control.
That's great. I appreciate so much all your comments today. And the next 2 slides are resources, but I want to give this back to Dr. Baisi because we do have a few questions from the audience. Just point out, one thing I wanted to point out is that a lot of times now your primary care office can help with a behavioral health referral. So just keep that in mind. Some of them even have people on site now. And then the last slide has a lot of online resources that are available around burnout and also about ways of coping with COVID for nurses, mindfulness, my organization, Federation of State Physician Health Programs, the AMA, National Academy of Medicine, and the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. So hopefully you'll get a copy of the slides so that if you want to look into any of these, they'll be available. Thank you all so much. Dr. Baisi.
Thank you, Kathleen. I have a few questions from the audience. First, some of us may be in a family where we are the only healthcare professional. How do you recommend we politely not be the expert for everyone?
That is definitely something that I dealt with a lot. I am the only healthcare professional in my family. On my in-laws side, my husband's also not a healthcare professional, and on my family, my own family side. And so I definitely set clear boundaries. You know, in the beginning, I was like, oh, should I do this? Should I do that? I was like, here, I'm going to set aside a time, and I'll like send an email to all of you with what my best recommendations are, and you get to do whatever you want with that information. But like calling me all the time, I just kind of like let them know that like I can't handle that. Like I'm already dealing with it every day at work. We can ask questions, we can consolidate like one communication thing, but like the back and forth, you know, like should I get the vaccine? Should I not get the vaccine? Like the back and forth back then. This is my best recommendation. You get to choose what you want to do. And setting clear boundaries around that is totally okay to self-preserve.
Agree. Agree. Just protecting that. We have sometimes like that no COVID clause, like no COVID, no politics, no religion. And just, you know, because everybody's opinion differs, whether you are in healthcare or not. And it's just so frustrating and stress we just don't need when people who are going by whatever resources or source they have are just, you know, they don't see what you see. And again, they don't see what we see. So it's really hard to get them to empathize with it. It's not anyone's wrong or right. Thank God they don't see what we see. And so it's just not a discussion I ever choose to get into for my own self-preservation.
Great, thank you. The next question is, how do you recommend we approach our own healthcare organizations about time for self-care for employees?
Well, I think we touched on this earlier. I think the number one thing you can do is to take care of yourself, because you will come at your request with much more clarity and articulation if you're kind of out of that reactivity zone. So, you know, I definitely feel like it's important to verbalize and advocate for yourself, but, you know, figure out what it is you're asking for and maybe have a plan about how you see that it could be implemented. So be part of the solution instead of just, you know, we never get this, or we don't have that, or we don't have enough money, or, you know, what is it that you're actually asking for and advocating for, and have a little bit of an idea, because honestly, your organization may be very willing to collaborate with you and see how they can make it happen. I mean, they're in uncharted waters too about how to best support the whole organization in times like this. So I'm sure they're absolutely open to suggestions, but they need to come from a place of moving forward and not just complaining. You know, I think that we all want to do better, and I think leadership is no exception. But but just, you know, take care of yourself, find yourself, use your words, and figure out how you want, what's your vision of what you want to see, and then share it with them.
Yeah, exactly, Diane. Echoing that. Oh, sorry, Kathleen, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that we didn't touch on this much, but I think there's some power in peer support too. So sometimes you may find some like-minded colleagues that together you can talk about this and maybe approach administration together. I mean, it's easy to get into, you know, commiserating together, but you can also be powerful advocates for each other. Go ahead, Dr. Shappy, sorry.
I also think when you're thinking about how to approach them, we spend a lot of time thinking about the problem. It's really easy to identify problems. They're like easy to identify, but what we really, I think, when we, and this is like in all of our lives, like if you focus, so like if we spend 90% of our energy and time thinking about the problem and bring that to administration, that's not so useful, and that only 10% on the solution. Finding the problems is easy. Like, so I try to structure myself and my time into thinking 10% about what is this problem, and then 90% of my time in thinking about what is the solution, and then presenting a solution forward, like suggestions, I think really make a big impact, and thinking about it that way.
Well, great. That brings us to the close of today's summit. On behalf of Neighborhood and the Providence Business News, I want to thank Kathleen, Dr. Shappy, and Diane for the important information you've shared today, and thank everyone else for attending. You will all receive a recording of today's summit in your inboxes over the next couple of days. We hope you found this summit helpful. We strongly encourage you to apply the strategies highlighted today for self-care. Thank you all again, and have a great day.
Thank you.